All right. Hi, class. How's everybody doing? So I had the pleasure to interview my wife tonight with you guys. Alyssa Webb is a special education teacher. She's been teaching for a long time, and she is going to talk to you about her specific population as well as kind of her expertise and what she's been doing for the last several years. So go for it.
All right, thank you for having me. As Nikki said, my name is Alyssa Webb. I have been working at the help group for almost 17 years now. I started out as a teacher's assistant. I then became a teacher. I taught in the high school level for about 4 years before becoming an administrator, working with our students with more moderate to severe disabilities. After that, I started working in our residential programs, working with adults in that setting. Then I became the director of adult residential programs for the help group for a number of years, and then decided I wanted to go back to teaching and have more of a regular schedule to accommodate family and those kinds of things. So I've been back in the classroom for 6.5 years now. I work with adults, young adults between the ages of 18 and 22 who have mild to moderate special needs. Most of my students are on the spectrum. I do have some students who have emotional difficulties. I have some students who have intellectual disabilities, but a vast majority are on the autism spectrum.
Awesome. And so for a general special education teacher that may work with little ones, how does your job differ comparatively since you work with an older population? How is your job different compared to maybe like a kindergarten or even like elementary school teacher for special education?
I think for my job in particular, because I work with students who are on what's called an alternative curriculum. And so my students are not earning a high school diploma, they're earning what's called a certificate of completion. And so for my particular position versus an elementary school position, even in special education, in elementary, you're still going to have the focus on teaching those, those basic skills, their basic reading and writing, giving the students as much of a background as you possibly can based on cognitive and developmental level. My goal for my students at this level is to use what they have already obtained and use it in a functional way. So our focus is all functional academics. So instead of writing paragraphs, we're writing emails. Instead of figuring out, for fractions, we're figuring out maybe percentages. If you're going to a restaurant, how much tip do you leave? What is a discount? What is the sales tax? So taking the information that they might have already learned and using it in a functional way. Our program is specifically designed for functional academics, independent living skills, and vocational education. So
you do a lot of things in the community as well. You teach in the classroom, but the community is also a classroom for you guys as well. So can you kind of talk about that a little bit to my students?
Yeah, prior to the pandemic, our classroom was about 80% in the community. So we would go in what we call community-based instruction, where we would practice the skills that they learn. So if they're learning measurement, if they're learning, sales tax or unit costs, we go to the grocery store and you can compare costs of items. Or shopping or whatever it is, interacting with customers. We would do a lot of things about customer service and anything that we're learning in the classroom, we would find interesting ways to apply in the community. In addition, our students in my particular program, because the focus is vocational skills, we are they have internships, and so they're working in the community. They work, anywhere between typically prior to the pandemic, between 2 and 3 days of their school day were spent working in the community. And then the other 1 or 2 days was spent on community-based instruction. And there was only about 1 day, which was the functional academics, independent living skills. So really the vast majority of our instruction was community-based. We've had to, of course, adapt it and be flexible in terms of the curriculum and the way that we manage the program. But That's still the idea. It's still the goal that whatever we're working on is functional for the students and useful and helpful for them.
All right. And, I guess I've seen a lot of the questions from my students. Many of them want to know why you chose to become a special education teacher specifically.
Mhm. When I was going through my undergrad, I was actually a law and society of criminal justice major for my BA, which has nothing to do with what I do now.
At all.
Excuse me, I'm just getting over a little cold. So I initially thought I wanted to be a kindergarten teacher. And
She'd
then
be an awesome kindergarten teacher even now, still.
And then I had a family friend who was a special education teacher, and I always had family that said, "Oh, you should try to do that." And I always said, "I don't know, let me figure it out myself." And then I thought, "Oh, I want to be a social worker." And then I thought, I'm not sure, if that's kind of what I wanted to do, in terms of my impression of what the job was as far as a social worker at the time, in terms of a lot of office, kind of a lot of paperwork, and that's not really my forte. So,
and you have a bleeding heart. So to be able to deal with the things that social workers deal with in the field, like DCFS and taking kids out of the home, I don't even think I could do that. So, I think that would be a very difficult position for you to take on.
So in my mind, I was thinking, oh, special education is, I know it's not exactly, but in my mind, I thought, okay, well, maybe let me go back to this kind of idea that was planted in my mind years ago, and let's take the teaching and take the social work where, because I think that a lot of what I do in my day-to-day is, more, it's
your case managing for sure.
Yeah, I'm assisting them with processing, especially with adults. We're processing a lot. I'm mediating a lot. I'm assisting with, everything that's going on in their lives. And so it has kind of become a mixture of the two in a sense.
Which is really interesting. It's a good segue for Litsy's question. She said, what is the most challenging part working with an older age group?
Mm-hmm. I think for me, the most challenging thing is seeing my students and their potential, seeing them succeed, seeing them meet challenges, seeing them do so well, and then graduate from our program and decide that they don't need any help. And some of them don't, but many of them do need help and should have help. And so it's really hard to see them work so hard and have put, for us as a staff perspective, to have put so much into it, and to see them not do anything, maybe because, parents don't think it's necessary, or they don't think it's necessary. But that's hard. It's hard because I do, I want each of my students to meet their full potential. And when they don't, I have to remind myself that it's not a reflection of me. It's, I have to be very specific about that with myself. Mm-hmm. But that is challenging for me, because I want every single one of them to leave my classroom and to be able to work in the community and, live in their own apartment one day, if that's what they want, or in their own parents' house or family's home, as independently as they can be. So I think sometimes my desire for them to have that, is bigger than their desire or their family's desire for them to have that. And that can be a challenge for me personally.
Sure. All right. My other student, Jose, he says, this is an interesting question. He says, what is the average amount of IEPs you have to do each year? And how difficult is that to balance with being a teacher as well? Good question.
Okay. Full disclosure, I hate IEPs.
So does everybody.
Okay. I mean, I understand the value, and I understand I understand all of it, but it is very time consuming. I have, it depends on how many students you have. I have up to 14 students each school year. So each of them have an annual IEP. Some of them might have a triennial IEP in addition to that during the year. Sometimes, a lot of times they'll combine them. And so you just have to do the one. But
And then
sometimes
they'll have a transition IEP as well.
No, they have an if they're graduating,
Exit.
they have an exit IEP. And so, it depends on how many students. Sometimes then you have students that graduate in January, and then you get new students who have IEPs. So you're like, well, I've already done all these IEPs. Now I have new students and I have to do more IEPs. And
so on average, maybe like 20, you'd say 15 to 20.
Yeah, 15 to 20, probably. Yeah, somewhere around then. It depends.
And how difficult is it to balance writing the 15 to 20 IEPs, as well as doing your curriculum, as well as teaching all day in the classroom and managing staff and going out in the community? How difficult is it to time manage for all of those things?
It's very challenging. My day never ends when I'm at work. I personally don't have any planning period. I know other teachers in special education who do, and I'm jealous.
Yeah.
I don't if I have 5 minutes on my computer, I'm doing something, whether it's for a report card or an IEP or an email to a parent or a meeting with students or whatever it is. So I'm always trying to maximize that time. I don't do well when I have a lot of downtime anyway, so it's okay, but it definitely, you do have to be organized in that way. You have to plan ahead.
Sure.
If at the beginning of every school year, I write down, I put it in a calendar, every student you can go through and know when the student's IEP should be coming. So you can kind of plan ahead and mentally prepare, okay, this month I'm going to be slammed. I can, so for instance, I don't have any IEPs in December. So
how nice.
So I already know I have an IEP coming up in January and then a couple in February. So I already know that I can start, just kind of start planning those. I can kind of get the basics down. I have a template that I use for every student where I write down all their old goals and, so I can kind of get it all ready to go. But each IEP takes,
hours,
many hours to write. And also, I think, if it's also done correctly, it takes hours to get the information and to assess properly and that kind of thing. So that's also hard. And I think, for new teachers going into something like this, I think it's important to know that it's very challenging and you have to kind of know where your boundaries are and what the priority is.
Absolutely. Yes. I think that's in many professions. The time management piece is key, and to having those boundaries and setting them, and keeping your word to yourself of I'm going to stop at 6 p.m. because that's what time you're going to stop. And then you do, and having those goals in mind. I actually would do that with my staff and telling them, when they need to be working, when they don't need to be working, because you need to do that, because otherwise you're not going to have a self-care plan and you'll burn out. So we're seeing that a lot actually, in education across the board, is that people are trying to do too much in this time frame with the kids coming back this year in person after COVID. And in general, it's been very difficult, especially for new teachers. I think that is interesting for my students who are potentially looking into the teaching field, is that it is hard to get into right now. However, be kind to yourself, I think, and just allow yourself to mess up. And that's part of the process and your learning. So there's nothing wrong with that. Along that line, Jose's second question is, who is your role model?
That's a hard one.
I know who your role model is. Your old administrator, come on.
Oh, well, I thought for teaching. Yes, I would say as far as working with individuals, I would say that the second principal I worked with when I was teaching high school, her name was Anita, and I always admired, I had my interview with her and I sat there in the interview and teachers were coming into the office the whole time during the interview, and because she was somebody that they trusted, somebody that they went to for questions. And I always remember that, a teacher came into her office and said, okay, well, I'm having this issue with this student, I would like to meet. And she said, okay. She looked at her calendar. Okay, how about today at 3:30 or whatever it was. And so that idea that you follow through, and you follow up, and you support people, I think has always stayed with me throughout all of my experiences. And, I have teachers who, will come to me for questions, and I try
All the
to,
time.
I try to remember that also, is that, follow up, follow through, and support in that way. And that goes a long way, I think.
Yeah. Kiana's question is, why did you choose special ed compared to gen ed?
That, when I was first thinking about it, actually I had been a babysitter. I was working with a little boy. He was 5 at the time. I was 14, I think. And he kind of grew up with me, and he was on the spectrum. He had what he would call Asperger's. So, and I worked with him. I would pick him up from school. He went to the help group, coincidentally. He was a student there at one of their programs, and I would even before that, when he was in kindergarten, I would, hang out with him and play with him and help him with his homework and all that kind of stuff. And he was then in high school, and I was, kind of figuring out, I had graduated from college, and I was kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do with myself. And that's kind of when the idea of, okay, social work, kindergarten teacher, et cetera, et cetera. And I, was picking him up from the help group, and I thought, maybe this is something I want to look into. So actually the school down the street from where we live, they had a special ed class, and I started volunteering there. I volunteered there. I could walk there from where I was living at the time, interestingly enough. And I walked there, and I volunteered probably, I don't know, 20 hours a week or so in the first grade special ed class. And I fell in love with it. So that's kind of where it came from. And then I decided to use that as kind of my my way into the CSUN program.
Yes. So you did your undergrad where?
My undergrad was at UC Santa Barbara
and then you did your credential where?
At CSUN.
And then you did your master's where?
At CSUN.
Okay. Did you do the master's combined program?
It was a little bit different then, but yes, it was pretty much, I forget the term that they use, but it was a couple extra classes to get the master's degree in addition to the credential. I have a mild to moderate special education credential.
And that's what my lecture is actually going to have focus on in the beginning of our course. So we've already talked about the differences between the mild moderate credential and the mod severe credential, because I'm interviewing you, I've already interviewed Bridget Betts, who's my other best friend. Everybody in my family has worked in the field in some way, shape, or form. But we already talked about the different requirements and things, which are very, very similar to what Alyssa has had to do as a special education teacher, but she did have to choose mild, moderate, or moderate severe. And depending on that credential is really going to see who you can work with in regards to the students. So for example, I work with someone with a mod severe credential, and she's an inclusion specialist. So I'm bringing her in to working with kiddos that have a little bit more challenges in their classroom and how to fully include them in a gen ed curriculum. So, there's different kinds of ways that you can market yourself and do different things. And so, yeah, there's lots of different ways you can teach, and doing that with the different types of credentials and degrees that you would get for teaching. Kiana's other question is, was the process to become a special ed teacher difficult or easy for you?
I mean, it was definitely a process. I know that just like Bridget, I had to do the RICA and the CSED and the CBEST. It was the same, they were all the same tests that you do for a general ed credential. I did the multiple subject CSET.
Which is the harder test, correct? The CSET is
Yeah.
harder than the CBEST,
Yes.
correct? Yes.
The CSET has the the drama portion and the physical education portion. I did it in 2 sittings.